Okay, let us begin. Uh, I intend to provide a lecture in several parts. This will be probably the first part on this great book, How to Read a Book. Yeah, this is one of the best books that I've ever read, and I have prepared a thorough analysis, and I intend to make a step-by-step commentary to help people become smarter. But to begin, a little bit of comedy. And I thought my jokes were bad. Give me a reason. For one of my, not for one of my men to pull your shirt off. Or about a magic trick. I'm gonna make the credibility of the Western educational system disappear. Ta-da! It's gone. So yeah, I will just show a few books. It's written by a Jewish author, Mr. Seymour Itzkoff. I'm trying to start a school revolution, inspired by Ron Paul, obviously. Charles Murray, Murray Rothbard, that's a German book about the German educational system. That's about the French educational system. I'm trying to start a new business, free education, but first I have to downgrade the reputation of the competitors. That's how it works. Yeah, that's about the British educational system. Yeah. About the French educational system again. I'm trying to convince the potential viewers of the interest of either homeschooling or educating oneself on the internet, or advocating privatized private schools. Yeah, because the internet enables to break the monopoly on the educational system. Yeah. Another recent book about the French educational system. Yeah. Another example about the French educational system. The Australian educational system. So if you are either French or German or English or American or Australian or any other Western nationality or citizenship, the probability that you might have been turned partly into an idiot is significant. Yeah. But I try to provide the cure to this educational mess with my lectures on how to read a book. Yeah. So I tried with this exposition to trash talk a little bit my competitors, basically the current educational system, but now I have to provide services to bring value to customers. That's free market entrepreneurship. So the introduction was maybe a little bit comical, but actually it's very serious. I will go pick up my document. UPS. Every educational system, every school system is a singular school system in a singular country. It belongs to a particular type of organization, either free market or homeschooling or socialized state-financed education. And all state-financed educational systems, they share in common the same fundamental characteristic. Yeah. And when it's really socialized, heavily socialized and heavily ideological, it's even stronger. So that's why we can deduce that if there is a problem in one educational system, a singular example, all the educational systems or the way of teaching or instructing the youth who share the same particularity, either Western or socialized or financed by public taxes, which is what socialized means, all the other singulars which share the same particularity will suffer from the same problems or share the same characteristics. That's why it's easy to deduce that Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Germany, France, Scotland, Spain, Italy, Belgium, etc. Share the same problems, and it has been empirically verified. I know this out of personal experience, and either if you are a Westerner, either you are aware that the educational system in the West is designed to turn people into idiots, or you are not aware, in which case it would be reinforcing proof that this is what it does, and that it even does it well. Because if you have gone through the educational system in a Western country over the past few decades, if you haven't noticed that there is a problem, it means that it has succeeded in turning you into an idiot. Yeah, so I will try to offer an alternative, my contribution to an alternative. This is already the case because there are lots of people who make free lectures on the internet. Precisely, this is what the internet enables: the sharing of information and an unlimited access to the totality of world knowledge. So I will begin by commenting the first part of this book, and I will follow the structure of the book. Yeah, so for the purpose of following a chronological thread, I will probably write down just the title of the chapter, and then I will come out with my own notes, my own commentaries. Yeah, so How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler, who's a Jewish American scholar, and Charles Van Doren. For the first time, it was officially published in 1940, but it was republished, reprinted with a new edition in 19 1967 and then 1972. And this edition was printed in 2014, but apparently it's the edition from 1972. So yeah, and it teaches how to read a book, and the greatest piece of advice, the greatest skill, in my view, which can be taught to any student in the modern world, is the ability to read a book and to read it well. And this book is really excellent. This is one of the best introduction to philosophy in a broadest sense, and one of the best books ever written. I have read it a lot of times, and here I'm a little bit serious. I try to share with others my matured thoughts about this book to really help them, because I've never really followed the teachings of this book up until relatively recently in my learning process. And if there are younger people or older people who are not accustomed to reading, if I can give them the knowledge or the pieces of advice that I wish I had when I was younger, maybe it will help them. So I briefly comment according to the chronological unfolding of the book. I just write notes so it will be easier to make the chronology of the video. Yeah. So I do not comment line by line, and it will be in several parts, because here are the notes, rigorous notes that I have taken, and I intend to comment eventually my own notes about the book, but I will do only the first part and the preface in this video. There are 4 parts. Part 1, the dimensions of reading. Part 2, the third level of reading, analytical reading. Part 3, approaches to different kinds of reading matter. Part 4, the ultimate goals of reading. So maybe there will be 2 or 3 or 4 videos depending on the time that each requires, but in this video I intend to comment the preface and the first part. So I comment my notes and I talk about reading books and the educational system. Let us begin. So the author, Mortimer Adler, notices that there was an increase of access to higher education, literacy, radio and television, namely a spread of knowledge and an access to information through the media in the 1970s compared to the 1940s. So here that's a commentary that the author makes 30 years broadly after the first edition of the book, where he restructured the book. He noticed that there has been indeed an increase in access to media and to higher education in the United States of America, but it was a little bit slower in the Western world at large, but it was predominant in the US. During these decades after the Second World War, with the economic prosperity in the 1950s, it has enabled a lot of people who before would otherwise wouldn't have been able to go to college to access college, and with the development of technology, productivity, and wealth creation, indeed the media, the media of communication, radio and television, became widespread. So one of the questions that this book implicitly seeks to answer or to find a solution to, one of the problems is how to find clarity in a world pervaded by a huge amount of information. It was already the case in the 1970s and in the 1940s, but it's even more intense, even more widespread, even more prominent in the internet age. Yeah. An idea that first sometimes I will make a book recommendation or promote some books. This trend, namely the dramatic shift in access to higher education in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, is a tendency which is commented intelligently, rigorously, and convincingly by Charles Murray and Richard Herrnstein in the book The Bell Curve. Okay, so an idea that is present throughout the book that the author insists upon is that it is important to read different books at different speed, namely to be able to judge which book requires what amount of time dedicated. There are books which are worth really studying thoroughly, commenting, analyzing, reading over and over to extract all there is to gain enlightenment. And there are books, they have to be read once, they can be read rather quickly, and it's not really necessary for gaining a higher understanding to spend a lot of time. And this ability to judge which kind of book deserves what kind of investment in terms of time, energy, and effort is acquired by gaining experience in reading books. He quotes Blaise Pascal, a French philosopher of the 17th century: "When we read too fast or too slowly, we understand nothing." Yeah. Elementary reading consists in being able to decipher the symbols on the printed page. In this sense, elementary reading, to read in this sense means simply able to decipher, even though one might not understand all the words. For instance, I understand a lot of English words. I will try to find a word that I do not understand, but that I can read because I recognize the signs, the letters, because this is the Latin alphabet. So in this sense, I will just find a word. Well, I understand all the words because I have read a lot of books and maybe I've read them well. A Tinder box, yeah, a Tinder box. I don't know what a Tinder box is. So I can read the word in the elementary meaning. I can decipher because I recognize the letter, but I don't really know what this means. Maybe it's a piece of wood, a piece of furniture made of wood. I don't know, that's an example. Yeah. So yeah, he notices that often the students, he was I think a college professor, are unable to get meaning from the printed page. So they are able to decipher, in this sense they can read because they can decipher the meaning. These are not Chinese writings or Japanese writing for an ordinary Western person who has never studied this language, or Egyptian hieroglyph or Arabic Arabic writings. They can decipher, but they cannot get the meaning. It means that here the word reading means the ability not only to decipher the symbol, but to get the meaning and to understand in a higher level. He will develop more on this later. He notices that there were already many poor and incompetent readers in the 1930s in the United States, even though it was already the US were already the most literate, most educated country in the world, probably in the 1930s. There were already signs of decline, nonetheless. Don't worry, dear Americans. If an American says the intelligence in our country has been declining, every Westerner can say, "Me too." I notice a decline of intelligence in my country, says the American, and then every other Westerner can say, "Me too." Let's make the Me Too movement great again. He notices an inaptitude for getting the central thought of a passage, and the typical reader remains a sixth grader until long into college. So here that's an example. 6th grader, I can decipher. I know broadly what it means. That's a school age, but because of my lack of empirical American culture, I don't know what it refers to, and I had to check on the internet, and apparently it's 6th grader means 11 or 12 years old. So yeah, he noticed that even college students, most people actually, they would remain 6th grader, namely they have the reading ability of a 12-year-old for most of their life, because they can decipher, they can read in the elementary sense, but they cannot go beyond, so they are poor readers. He distinguishes 4 levels of reading: elementary reading, inspectional reading, analytical reading, and syntopical reading. Elementary means the ability to understand the basic meaning of words. Elementary reading means the ability to extract in a short amount of time the structure and the main ideas and the topic of the book, to get the best out of a book in a very limited amount of time. So for instance, a book that if you are assigned to reading this book, an inspectional reading would be, you have 45 minutes to tell me what this book is all about. The purpose is not to start on page 1 and to read maybe a few dozens of pages, but the purpose is to read the table of contents, the index, the bibliographical references, the structure, the introduction and the conclusion, and in less than an hour it's possible to have a broad idea of what a book is all about. And it's very useful because you first see the whole, even though very briefly, before starting to go through the book. That's inspectional reading, and it can be very useful. Then analytical reading, that's really highly demanding, highly skilled reading. That's college level reading. It's really to extract every relevant information out of a book. And finally, the 4th level, that's what he calls syntopical reading. It's the ability to extract from any given book information which enable to relate to a given topic of which other books talk about. For instance, someone who would be interested in making a syntopical reading about the question of the decline of educational standards in the Western world over the past 3 or 4 decades, they would have to read all of the books or some of the books and many other that I have presented, and extract the ideas and connect them with one another. These are different types of books because they all revolve around the topic of the decline and the problems of the Western educational system, but there are differences in country, differences in kinds of criticism, differences in the viewpoint adopted. There are leftist criticism, conservative criticism, free market criticism, criticism from teachers with an experience of the educational system, criticism from outsiders, criticism from students about the loan, the student loan problem, etc. So they all revolve around the same topic, but they are all different perspectives about different particular types of situations. So a syntopical reading would consist in reading most of these books and many others, and to find a common ground, one might say. Yeah. So he distinguishes two types of books: theoretical and practical. 3 types: theoretical books. In his view, these are books about mathematics, the sciences, the social sciences, or the human sciences, history and philosophy. Practical books, these are self-help books or know-how books, or books which teach skills, or self-development books, etc. So there are the theoretical books, the practical ones, and finally what he calls imaginative literature, which includes lyric poetry, epics, novels, and plays. So theory, practice, and fiction, yeah. Plus reference books like encyclopedia, dictionaries, books containing only data for scholarly work, current journalism and advertising. So these are reading materials. These are kind of books plus reading materials. So that was the preface. Now, the first part is divided in a few chapters. Yeah, 5 chapters. So now I will write the title of the first chapter. Of course, I encourage people who might be interested, if they are not, if they are not used to reading a lot, to buy this book and to study this book for themselves. But for those who are accustomed to reading, maybe they won't even need to watch the lectures, and if they do, it will be enough and they won't need to buy or read the book. Activity and art of reading. Okay, so here I comment partly chronologically the development of the structure of the books, but also I comment my own notes. So he makes a distinction which is relevant between reading books to gain understanding, which means to be able to connect the events or the phenomena, and books to gain information, which is to acquire more data, more knowledge about facts or events. So information versus understanding. He notices that a reader, a person who is used to reading a lot of book, gains a lot of his knowledge or information or understanding about the world through the written word, not through radio, television, direct experience or interaction, spoken interaction with others, but through the written word. I mean, it's possible to have all sorts of information, but a reader is someone who spends a lot of time reading and whose view of the world is mediated by his reading experience. Yeah. It appeals, one might say, or it is a less emotional, more calm, more intellectual way of getting to know the world. Yeah. Also, I wrote a book. Usually, if it's a good book, it's the product of a lifetime of experiences. And sometimes of months or even years of calm and steady work. Namely, a person who publishes a book, a good book, the great books, they are the fruit of months or sometimes years or even decades of intellectual labor or experience of life. And if they are really finely tuned and refined, they are in a way works of art. So when someone spends time reading a great book, he has direct access to a concentrated amount of information and experiences. Whereas getting information from television, the internet, radio, or journalism, it's much more instantaneous. It's less thought through. It contains less reflection, less intellectual development, etc. There can be intelligent way of communicating information, either on TV or internet or radio, etc. But the very medium, namely the spoken word with the heated debate, etc., is less convenient for sharing knowledge than sitting peacefully into one's office or bedroom or how do you call this, in one's own room, and to peacefully and calmly study a book which itself is the product of a lifetime of calm intellectual reflections sometimes. That's why it's important to read the classics. That's a cure against, I wrote, feminism and ignorance. About the internet. So here are my notes that I have thought about when I read the book. So partly I comment some of what the book says in a chronological unfolding, but partly these are my notes and my view that I sometimes implement. The internet enables a free market of ideas, namely all ideas from all over the world are being made available on the internet. That's why we are living an exciting era from the point of view of access to knowledge. It's unprecedented in the history of the world, one might say, and it brings about a threat of a loss of monopoly for the traditional institutions which share knowledge, namely academia, schools, the classical media, the journalists, and the politicians and the state agents. They are being threatened by the loss of their monopoly because they possess a monopoly on public speech. Whatever goes through the medium of politicians, the media in the sense of the journalist, whether they use radio, television, newspapers, etc., and the academics and the scholars, and usually they are kind of connected. They are encountering a new competition with the rise of the internet because anyone can produce information, and that's why there are all these talks about fake news, hate speech, etc., simply because their economic and intellectual monopoly, which guarantees financial resources and social status and influence and power, is being threatened by the arrival of new competitors. And that's why they seek to remain monopolists. So I wrote, the media in the modern day, they are like the Catholic Church before the Protestant Reformation, or like the puppet showman in the allegory of the cave, in Plato's cave, in the 7th book of the Republic, I think by Plato. Then, the difference between immediacy and mediation. That's a very basic philosophical distinction. Immediate experience of the world can be had through direct experience of the world, being in the world, experiencing the world, speaking to people, or observing. These are means of gaining information. And a mediated, so it's a direct experience, a mediated experience can be had through reading books, watching TV, the internet, radio, photos, movies, etc. Because the media, that's the plural forms of a medium, it's precisely that which does not give a direct access, but that which stands as an intermediary. That would be the subject, that would be the world, and the media is that which either enables the subject to gain information about a topic or a country or an era that he cannot access directly because of physical limitations, or intellectual limitation in the case of popularization of scientific books, for instance, or popularization of science and culture in newspapers. So that is the good aspect. The bad aspect is the media, if they gain a monopoly on providing a worldview to the masses without letting them or allowing them or enabling them to have direct experience, they can distort the worldview, which brings about confusion in the masses. And we live in an age where people in the Western world are slowly losing their trust in the official figures of
intellectual authority, because the media, the politician, and the scholars and the educational system is losing its credibility because the internet offers a new medium which enables people to create and to share knowledge directly without the intermediary of the classical media. Yeah. Okay. So I wrote, each individual has a point of view on the totality. The totality would be the universe. In my view, this is God. Every individual thinking subject has his or her own unique perspective on the totality because he or she perceives the world. There is only one world, but each individual perceives the totality from his or her own singular point of view. And all the singular point of views, the consciousness of all the singulars in their totality, this is the mind of God. I borrowed this idea from Fichte, the German philosopher, but actually that's the case. That's why humans are important, because every human contains in his mind a store of experiences on the world, which is the experience of God in a way. And that's why potentially every human could have interesting things to say, but there are those who are more interesting than others. But that's why human life is precious and important, because if we use a metaphor, God would be like a brain, and each human would be a neuron within the cosmic brain in a way. Yeah. Also, a philosophical question: what is more real? Is it the immediate experience or the mediated experience? And the example that I've taken is, what is more genuine in a way? Is it, for instance, go living in Japan for a few months to have a direct experience of what Japan is all about, or to read books about Japan? What would give the most genuine experience of what modern Japan or any other country is? Is it direct, immediate experience, talking to people, walking the countryside, visiting the cities, going to museum maybe, or experiencing the life of the people directly by interacting with them, or reading a book or reading books about the history, the culture, the sociology, the economics, the politics, etc. What would be more authentic or more real? That's a philosophical question. Also, that's a remark from the author. Visual communication has an enormous impact because precisely people, they see directly the event, the phenomenon which is being shown by the media, so it impacts them as if it happened to them directly, although this is just an event drawn out of the totality, but which can be made bigger or larger through mass communication. And this is what distorts the views of people, because they get easily deceived by emotionalism, sensationalism, which makes manipulation easier. And I wrote, especially of women in a democracy, women are more easily manipulated than men, because they fall prey more easily to this kind of manipulation, where images of suffering, people suffering, children, or the emotional aspect, it kind of short circuits the rational faculty, because we perceive this immediately and it affects us greatly. Whereas if it were recontextualized within the totality, of course, when in the case of negative events, that would be bad, but it works for positive events. People who have privileged, that's the example of, I didn't write this, but I think about this now, the example of the influencers on the various social media. They show the good aspect of their life. So the person who shows, 20 minutes of the life of a prestigious figure of influence, he thinks, oh, that's wonderful, they are always happy, rich, whatever, but actually they only see one tiny fragment, and maybe they are miserable the rest of the day, or the rest of the week, or whatever. That's why the media have a lot of power to distort the view of people. Yeah. The emotion is tied to a part. The intellect, when the intellect, the mind thinks rigorously, by the very nature, the intellect thinks the totality. Let us take an example. There are economic problems. A documentary about a broken family which loses its house, or someone who loses its job. It can be made. It can be presented in a very emotional way, and it will have an impact upon those who watch this. But the truth about an economic situation is the whole of society and all the interactions. That's why it's very easy to manipulate people, because to think wholly, it requires time, concentration, focus, and humans, they have a very short attention span. Usually, that's why I started the video with some sort of a joke to try to get people hooked up a little bit. That's why I wear a T-shirt to spread my message or my messages, because sometimes it's easier to communicate in this way. Yeah. Also, people who watch TV or listen to radio while doing another activity, it brings about a loss of focus and attention. The question about the media, the question that Mortimer Adler asked himself already in the 1970s and maybe 40s, do we understand the world better thanks to the modern media? There is a disconnection between the view offered by the media, TV, radio, newspapers, etc., and the day-to-day experience of people. This is what might be called cognitive dissonance. Each journalist gives only his or her own limited perspective, hence the question, who knows what? Yeah. Here I took an example, for instance, multiculturalism. For a person with an IQ of 115 versus multiculturalism for a person with an IQ of 85, that's a different experience of the same social phenomenon, one might say. This creates a lot of misunderstanding, for instance, in the modern West. Also, we live in an age of the anti-media, reaction against the media, which is similar to what happened during the Protestant Reformation with the spread of knowledge enabled by the printing press, and in the 18th century, the century of enlightenment, with the rise of literacy and education among the bourgeoisie, one might say, and the shortening of the communication, the rise of culture and the shortening of communication in the 18th and 19th century, and it's even more prevalent today with the internet. Okay, so now about the distinction between facts and understanding. Knowledge, there can be an opposition between the raw data, the facts or the events, versus understanding. And understanding would mean to classify, to order, to structure the data, the sensory data, through logical connections. That's why some facts are sometimes irrelevant, because being able to order the facts, to give meaning by structuring the facts, a lot of time it's more important than the facts themselves. The structure is more important than the materials, one might say. That would be the example of the structure of a house versus the components or the materials which makes the house. A pile of bricks with no structure is a pile of bricks. Pieces of wood which are well ordered, well structured, they can be built to make a house if there is a good architect. So the structure here would be more important than the materials, namely a structured how do you call this? To assemble in a structured way pieces of wood, it can give a house and a shelter, But just to pile up randomly pieces of bricks, piles of bricks, this is just a pile of brick. If there is no structure, it will not give a shelter. So yeah, the bricks are to the structure of the house. The bricks or the wood or the marble or the metals or whatever, they are to the structure of the house or the shelter or any other building. What the facts are to the logical connections when it comes to producing knowledge. Then also it's very easy to manipulate people by simply leaving aside some facts. In the modern world, there are a lot of facts about anthropology, demography and psychology which are simply not discussed. This book, not only the theory is considered controversial, although it's quite solid, but it brings about facts which themselves are controversial. That's why there is a tremendous manipulation in the Western world, because the journalists, the politicians, the scholars and the educational system, there are simply facts, topics which are not discussed at all, like demographics, IQ, sociobiology, ethnicity, the banking system, the influence of some elite groups. It's completely left aside. It's not even discussed. It's not that there are wrong opinions or heretical views. It's simply that it's not even discussed. Sometimes, or most of the times, but it's becoming more and more difficult to avoid the debates, because through the internet and through their daily experience, people become aware more and more of some changes. Yeah. So he draws a distinction between knowing everything about something, that in philosophical language would mean to know all the determinations, to know an object in its singularity, all the determinations of a singular object. That would mean to know everything about something, and to understand would mean to grasp the particular or the universal. So there are less determinations, characteristic, properties, features in the universal or the particular than in the singular. But if the determinations, which are less numerous, if they are understood, they apply to a broader range. So that's an inverse quantitative relationship. Every singular object, it applies to human, it is fully determined. It has a lot of determinations, but they only apply to this singular. The particular, it has less determination, but it applies to a broader range. For many, the particularity of this group, it applies to 3 singulars. Here, that's 2. That's just an illustration. And the universal, it has even less determinations, but if they are properly understood, they apply to all. That's why in all the books that I've shown at the beginning, the universal is Western educational system, which means decadent in the modern world, or socialist educational system, which is also decadent. That's why understanding, here I will promote a book by Mr. Di Lorenzo. I will illustrate my UPS. In this book, the chapter is socialism really the best way to organize schools? He explains why government-funded schools cannot be efficient. So if you understand the universal, you don't need to study thoroughly all the singular cases, Australia, France, America, Germany, etc., because you understand the fundamental determinations. So yeah, That's what logic enables to do. Yeah. He notices rightly, judiciously, with relevance, that too many facts as well as too few are both detrimental to understanding. If we are inundated with facts, if there are too many facts, statistics, data, it can be misleading because it's excessive, but if there are too few, it is misleading as well. To understand any situation properly, the proper measure has to be found. We find an example here. Here we have pages filled with high school sample. It's unreadable, it's unintelligible because these are just statistics, and yeah, that's an example. The inundating someone with facts, it's a way of misleading in a way. So the proper measure has to be found. Yeah. And I wrote, the methodology of communication consists in giving the proper facts. They have to be true, but then also the relevant facts. And here, I will just go pick up the book about the World Fact book. Yeah, I will make a joke. You think you can steal from us and just walk away? Yeah. Yeah, this example, there are a lot of statistics for every country in this book. So it's very useful, and I wrote, when it comes to the methodology of communication, and I intend to make a video about this, to communicate properly, the proper facts have to be given, and all the relevant facts about demographics, IQ, capitalism, etc., etc. This is why there are scholarly books which are not really very interesting to read as such, but which give a lot of data. Here I will take an example. These kind of books, A Brief Economic History of the World, it contains a lot of data, and especially a book like this, The World Economy, A Millennial Perspective, Historical Statistics. It's filled with statistics, so it's almost unreadable as such, but it's very useful and very practical, one might say, because it contains an enormous amount of data. So any serious economic work has to draw inspiration from books like these. Here is really a good one. And here, a book by Mr. Richard Lynn with Tatu Van Hanen, IQ and the Wealth of Nations. This is another example of what might be called a statistical book. It's more than just statistics. It develops a theory, a hypothesis, and a thesis, but it contains an enormous amount of data which are genuinely useful, like the ones contained in here, but the problem with the CIA is that they do not talk about all the relevant facts about IQ, demographics, anthropology, etc., etc. Also about the media and groupthink, collective thinking. Mortimer Adler notices that the media make thinking seem unnecessary. He already noticed this, because the media, they pick up the facts and they process them, and the metaphor would be they pick up the ingredients and they cook them and they serve the meal. So the media are like the cook in a restaurant. They choose the facts, like the cook chooses the ingredients, and then they process them, they cook them, and they serve the dishes. and I wrote processed information or processed thinking is like processed food. Processed information is like processed food. Here's the illustration. So here we have junk food, and here we have junk media, I might say. Yeah. So the analogy is kind of relevant. So a good cook is someone who chooses and picks up the good ingredients, but also who knows how to cook them. Yeah. Grow your own food if possible, and grow your own thoughts if possible as well. That's why I wrote, and here it's very, very relevant and very important. Fake news, the notion of fake news is kind of irrelevant philosophically, because even if there are alternative sources of information who produce fake, or not fake, but wrong information, an information is not wrong because, I mean, it's wrong because it is not adequate to the reality that it is supposed to describe. That would be the basic philosophical definition of true versus fake. But actually, because of the very structure of the media, an information, even if it's correct in terms of describing an event which really occurred, most of the time it's nonetheless false from a philosophical standpoint, because it's completely taken out of context. It's decontextualized. So that's why the media, even if they did not share fake news, or even if all their informations were accurate, and most of them are accurate, they are nonetheless false from a philosophical standpoint, because they are completely abstract, because they only speak about aspects of reality, and they do not recontextualize within the totality of all information. Because it's manufactured in a way that makes it more entertaining or emotional than enlightening. So for philosophical reason, the media, they lie even though they speak the truth. Formally, they speak the truth most of the time, because they do not lie outrightly, but they lie philosophically because they only speak a tiny fragments of reality. Yeah. I just take an example. If someone asks the question, what is this book? If I answer, it's an object made of paper, I speak the truth. But it's a deception, or it's stupid, or it's fake nonetheless, because this book is more than just paper. Beneath this cover there is more than ink. Beneath this cover there is an ID. Mr. Biden. And IDs are bulletproof. Yeah. Not just Mr. Biden, but all those who implements socialism. Yeah. So he writes also, Mr. Adler, the packaging of intellectual views and positions is the result of the best minds of our days. he talks in the 1970s, and maybe even before. The media bosses and the journalists. So picking up the pieces of information, cooking them or processing them, and then selling them to the customers, to the viewers. That's what the books by Mr. Chomsky and Ben Shapiro, etc. What they talk about, I guess. That's why you can sell. Let us keep the analogy. You can sell edible food, which is nonetheless poisonous. This is what the media do. Also, I wrote groupthink, collective hive mind, and mindless repetition. Like diversity is our strength when it's mindlessly repeated, or Je suis Charlie by the French crowds when it's mindlessly repeated. This is just manipulation, collective manipulation. The people, they just mindlessly repeat slogans. Mr. Adler notices the viewer doesn't make up his own mind. He rather inserts a cassette into a cassette player and pushes playback when necessary. A lot of ordinary people, when intelligent topics are being discussed, or political topics, or economic or cultural topics are being discussed, sometimes when they are asked, they just, that's the analogy is from the book. They insert a cassette into their mind, they push play, and they repeat whatever slogan the media has implemented in their mind. And the cause of social conformity, the reason why people mindlessly repeat what the figures of authority, whether these are the politicians, the journalists, the scholars, or the artists, the famous artists, when they do politics, the reason why most people mindlessly repeat is because they seek social conformity. They just want to fit into the group. That's an evolutionary mechanism for survival, because in order to adapt historically in the biological, sociobiological perspective, people had to submit to group discipline, but when the group become manipulated and make stupid decisions, conforming to the group is really stupid. If a group decides to commit suicide, if you conform, it's not in your best interest nor in the best interest of the group. Yeah, so the reason why most people blindly follow stupid slogans or stupid ideology is simply because of social conformity, which can be explained sociobiologically. Yeah. Also, I wrote about the media and the politicians today. They are really priests and clerks, and the clergy of old, really, like there are religious dogma. There is the orthodox views, political correctness, and the heresy. There are the clerks and the priests, the journalists, the public intellectuals, the politicians, etc. There is the Inquisition for wrong think. There are the devils and the saints, those who are praised, those who are shamed. There is the scapegoat. They talk about purity and impurity. You have to have pure thoughts, pure behavior, pure intentions. And there are the impure who threaten the well-being of the community. There's the religious hypocrisy as well. The threat of the apocalypse, the climatic apocalypse, economic apocalypse, ethnic apocalypse, etc., etc. This is how the media and the politicians manipulate, and this is how all the state or all the powerful or the state agents have manipulated the masses over the ages by creating outcasts that they present as a threat to strengthen group cohesion by fear and manipulation. And yeah, Mr. Philip Nemo, that I have been promoting, that I will keep promoting, talks about this very intelligently. One of the best books written in French in the 21st century, and one of the best books about collective groupthink and intellectual decadence. It's worthy of being translated in all the languages of highly developed highly developed countries and intellectual culture, because it can apply, that's UPS, the singular case of France can shed light on English society, American society, German society. That's really one of the best French intellectuals in the modern day and age. Yeah. And I wrote, it's not enough to repeat a slogan, even if the slogan is good, like end the Fed. Where is Ron Paul? The good thing about Ron Paul is that I can pick up any of his book. Most of them, they are good, or maybe all of them. End the Fed. Of course, it's good to repeat end the Fed, but if the people, if they don't understand, they just mindlessly repeat what the crowd says, and they just mindlessly follow the crowd. And that's the reason why I try to provide this lecture and these lectures that I intend to make about how to read a book, because my ideal is as long as possible, as long as necessary, to encourage people to become readers alone or with others, but calmly read books, the books that they can or want to read. But yeah. Okay, about active reading. That's page 4. The rules of reading. So here he talks about the rules of reading. The rules of reading enable to develop skills in reading, which can be applied to any kind of reading materials: newspapers, magazines, pamphlets, articles, tracts, advertisements, and books, obviously. Reading has to be active. The more active, the better. And activity means to exert a greater range of activities. So active reading, that's a greater range of activities with more intensity. So to perform each kind of action while reading more intensely, analyzing, memorizing, imagining, remembering, connecting, etc., linking with other ideas, illustrating. These are various activities, and each one has to be done as intensely as possible, and that's good reading. Effort in many activities. Here, an interesting distinction between being active and being passive while reading, and it applies to listening as well. Listening or watching lectures on the internet, it happens as well. He said reading and listening are thought to be passive. The example is audiobooks, while writing and speaking are thought usually to be active. But no, work and efforts are expected from the reader and the listener, especially if it can be replayed. Namely, to read and to listen, it seems to be passive, contrary to writing and speaking. the reader is to the writer what the listener is to the speaker. But actually, no, reading and listening, they have to be active as well. Otherwise, this is just infotainment, tititainment, Panem and Kirkenses. Yeah. Here I will make a joke. I had planned this joke, but I just remembered to make the joke. So I will make a short, not a pause, but I will make a short break to make a good joke. Yeah. Let's make a good joke. If there are people watching this maybe for the first time, they will ask themselves, but who is this person? He seems to be really funny and really intelligent. Yeah. They talk about me in some books, the good books, of course. So here's the joke. About reading books. This is a t-shirt for women, so that's for women. But here is the joke. I love women with big books. Here's the joke. That's a joke, that's a joke, that's a joke. That was the joke. Yeah. So, let us continue. About catching information, it's connected with passive and active reading. Since reading is not passive but requires activity, he notices with a good analogy, receiving information is not like receiving a blow or a massage or a judgment from the court, or not like receiving a legacy. It's more like catching like the catcher in a game of baseball or the golden snitch in Harry Potter, the ball, which is the piece of information, is passive, like the written material. Yeah. So that's a very relevant and very intelligent need to catch the message of a book. It requires activity like catching a ball in a game of baseball. It's not like receiving a legacy or a blow, etc., etc. Yeah, I will make a joke for intelligent women who love boys with big books. I have big books. I wrote the joke. Receiving information is not like receiving a blow or a blowjob. Precisely, it's like catching a ball in a game of baseball. It requires a focus, attention, etc., etc. The writer is not trying not to be caught, although sometimes it seems that the German metaphysician, sometimes it seems that they are trying not to be understood, although they are trying to be understood. Yeah. Different writers are more or less easy to grasp. The art of reading that this book seeks to teach consists in being able to catch every sort of communication, even the writings of the German metaphysicians. Then about the amount of effort. A piece of writing is a complex unit. It's a whole with many parts. The amount which is understood while reading a book depends on the amount of effort. The different mental acts, each has to be done more or less skillfully. For instance, when reading a book, one has to contextualize in what context was this book produced, the causal relationships. Here I'm just talking about thinking about a book without even the content, but the thinking seriously about a book in an inspectional reading. When just if someone inspected a book briefly, the kind of questions which ought to be asked would be first to contextualize the appearance of the book, to what kind of problem does a book like this seek to find a solution to, what is the cause of the appearance of such a book, what is or what might potentially be the impact of the book, what is the psychology of the author, what was or what were his intentions, etc., etc. Better reading means more active, it means more intensity. Better reading means to perform a greater range of different mental activities with more intensity. That's good reading. Yeah, that's intensity and extension. Yeah. Then the goals of reading. What is the purpose of reading? There is a distinction between reading for information and reading for understanding. And reading for information means the reading material contains more facts, whereas reading for understanding, it's more theoretical. And here, the book by Per Bylund that I've been reading now for a while. well, I had cleaned my room, but since I've been working for a long time now, it has been a little bit disrupted. Here. A book like this is kind of the opposite of a book like this. Both are really useful and they are really good, but here, someone who reads this book, he reads for information, to collect data and numbers and statistics, etc. Here, there are almost no, actually there are, as far as I know, no data. It's purely theoretical. So reading a book like this enables to interpret almost all economic data. It enables to acquire the thinking capability to understand. It's really how to think. It's not a new data or a collection of data about the economy. It's how to think. So here, reading this book, it does what the title says it does, namely it teaches how to think about the economy. That's an example of what Mortimer J. Adler calls reading for understanding. The art of reading consists in gradually lifting yourself from a state of understanding less to a state of understanding more, with nothing but the power of your own mind. So to read better means to be able to increase your ability to think, to connect, to see patterns, to understand, etc., etc. By working on the book and working on your mind, yeah. And he notices usually the most difficult books are those who deserve the most intense reading, the highest amount of effort, because they are the most rewarding and the most interesting. Usually books which are very complex at first sight or at the first reading, they are the ones who are worthy of being studied thoroughly, even if it takes many years and sometimes with breaks. So you can study a book and then you leave it aside for many months or many years, and you come back when you have accumulated more experiences, and you will interpret the content differently. He talks about this at the end of the book. It is not the book which has grown, the book hasn't changed, but you have grown, so you understand more. If it's really a good book, yeah, this is what happens. Then he notices about the equality of mind. Usually that's where the author is in terms of knowledge. Most of the time, it's not always the case, because sometimes the readers are more intelligent than the authors. But usually, if you buy a good quality book, you are here in terms of knowledge, the author is here, and the purpose is to elevate yourself to his level, to become peer with the author, and to be able, whether the author is deceased or still alive, but to be able to share his thoughts. He notices that the relationship between a book and a reader is a communication between unequals. There is inequality at the beginning, and you have to equalize by working on the book and by working on yourself and on the mind to overcome this equality in knowledge. And if equality of mind is achieved, if understanding and clarity of communication is achieved, equality of mind is achieved as well. If you understand everything, you are like two minds in the same mold. If you understand that you do not understand, you can ask someone who understands, either by reading a book or asking to a living person. Yeah. information versus understanding. Information, for instance, these are IQ data or economic data, and understanding, that would be the theories. So there's a distinction between the data and the categories. A mass of data, that would be a mass of singular cases or singular events, and the categories to think, so that would be the data, and that would be the categories. Thinking means ordering the multiplicity of data to make it intelligible. Yeah. Here I took an example from modern American politics. To know that America in the 1950s was 90% white, and that today it has become approximately 60% white. To know about these data, it enables to shed a lot of light on modern American politics. Yeah, it's not enough. Of course, there are many other data which ought to be known. And I wrote, for instance, the data on sugar consumption. I will go pick up the book. When talking about the decline of America or the Western world at large over the past 60 or 70 years, the data which are contained in books like these about sugar consumption and junk food consumption, they are important, as well, of course, as the demographic changes, etc. But it's enlightening to correlate the decline. It's not enough, of course, but it's enlightening nonetheless to correlate the decline in terms of prestige, influence, economic power of most Western countries since the 1950s with the consumption of sugar or junk food, etc., etc. Correlation is not causation, but it expresses a trend. Yeah. Then precisely the proper logical categories have to be applied. Why is the West declining regarding the question of sugar? Maybe because there is a loosening of individual restraint in terms of consumption, because the socialized healthcare system gives an incentive not to take care of one's own health, or because people are more seeking immediate gratification than long-term reward, or because an excess of wealth contains in itself the seed of its own downfall, because balance has to be restored. There are many hypotheses which can be made, or because of there are many reasons, but precisely once the data are acknowledged, first you have to check if the data are correct, but then you have to interpret, which means use the proper categories to organize, theorize, structure, categorize, interpret, etc., etc. That's the distinction between Anglo-Saxon empiricism and German metaphysics. He rightly notices and remarks that to increase the store of information about any topic does not necessarily mean to improve the understanding about the topic. And here an excellent example. This book helps understand a lot about economics. It's a tremendous help and guidance to understand some fundamental trends of the economic processes, but it contains almost zero data. So reading here, that's my metaphysical view, reading thoroughly and well one book like this, it's one of a kind, so there are not many books as good as this one in terms of intelligibility, accessibility, and intelligence. Reading this book once and reading it well, it will shed a lot of light on countless other books about economics which contain mostly data and whose interpretation of the data are incorrect or wrong or delusional. So it's more interesting to invest a lot of time and effort in reading a good theoretical book once, because then it will be able to shed light onto a broad range of phenomena and data. Yeah. That's what I wrote. Facts are irrelevant in a way. That's my little bit arrogant German self in my struggle against the Anglo-Saxon and their narrow-minded view. Facts, who cares about the facts? What is important is the the structure, the coherence of my metaphysical system. And then the Anglo-Saxons, they get a little bit annoyed when the arrogant Germans, because the Anglo-Saxons, they are very interested in empiricism. Well, it's not, no, that's a joke, but actually it's serious in the sense that historically the Anglo-Saxon philosophers, which have been and still are influenced by empiricism, Locke, Hume, utilitarianism of Mill and Bentham, and the analytical school of Russell, etc. The Anglo-Saxons, they are very bent on studying the facts, whereas the Germans, the Anglo-Saxons, they accuse the Germans, Leibniz, Hegel, Heidegger, Fichte, sometimes Kant, of losing themselves in pure abstractions, armchair theorizing, as they call this. Yeah. If here that's a joke for scholars, that's a joke. If the way an Anglo-Saxon scientist reasons is, if the theory contradict the facts, change the theory, of course that's common sense science. The German, that would be, if the facts contradict the theory, the problem comes from the facts, not from the theory. Which of course sounds very arrogant for the Anglo-Saxons, because yeah. I wrote also as a personal remark, most of the books that I enjoy reading the most contain no facts. The works of Hans Hermann Hoppe, Per Bylund, Kant, Hegel, etc. The Austrian economists and the German metaphysicians, they can both contain the same fundamental determination of being, of containing very few, if no facts at all. In the writings of the German metaphysician, of course, there are no facts and no data. But in the writings of the Austrian economists, the Austrian school of economics, it's the same in a way. Learning consists in understanding more, not remembering more information. So the difference between data and understanding is like the difference between learning versus remembering, in a way. And to the question where to find the information, someone who knows how to read for the sake of understanding, usually he knows how to read for the sake of finding data and information in terms of statistics, etc. Yeah, then I wrote, the truth consists in giving all the relevant facts plus the proper interpretation. So first, the facts, they have to be correct, and all the relevant facts have to be given on any topic, and then they have to be interpreted correctly, because the science, the movement of science, precisely consists in these are the facts, let us say, and the interpretation can differ the way the same set of facts will be interpreted, namely theorized, organized, and structured theoretically, will be different depending on the metaphysics and the worldview of the scientist, in a way. So, yeah. Usually in the physical sciences, there is almost or very rarely debates about the facts, because the modern physics department relies heavily on observation. So usually most scientists, they agree on most facts, but where they disagree is in their interpretation of the facts. Whereas in the social sciences, usually the social scientists, they do not even agree on the facts. Yeah. I wrote, history is a narration of facts, and there is a distinction between a feminist history and the history of women. Afro-American history versus the history of Afro-Americans. A people's history versus the history of the people. The history of women, the history of Afro-Americans, or the history of the people, usually it's good epistemologically because it's neutral, but feminist history, it's ideologically bended. And we have a lot of this in the modern the history of women, if it is scientific, I mean, if it studies the sociology, sociobiology, and cultural role of women throughout the ages, that can be scientific. But if the history of women become feminist history, it is being distorted by ideology, in a way. Also about the scientific process, each new scientific discovery sheds new light onto the present, the past, and the future. It enables, every time a scientific discovery is made chronologically, it enables to make predictions about the future, and it retrospectively reinterpret the past given the new paradigm, as they call this. And here an example, race at the end of the 19th century, Darwinian biology enabled anthropologists to reinterpret the past with the categories of racial anthropology and to anticipate the future, that would be eugenics. Yeah, and the same goes with IQ. When IQ was discovered, theorized seriously and rigorously at the beginning of the 20th century, and a book like the bell curve, the analysis that they provide with modern IQ research, it sheds a new light onto all past political, social, and economic history. So it enables to project the new categories, here that would be the relationship between intelligence and social status, to project this onto the historical process, to analyze it in a new way, and it enables to shed light onto the present and to make predictions for the future. So every time a new scientific paradigm emerges, it brings about a revolution in a way, and the same goes with evolutionary psychology. Once a new paradigm breaks through, the entire historical process can be reinterpreted with the new categories, the new method. Yeah. Here I will just take an example. Two examples actually. To illustrate what I've just talked about. The development of modern sociobiology, it has always worked like this in a way, but it's more frequent with the modern the modern development of technology which enables communication and the spread of knowledge, a book like this is to apply biology in a way to an interpretation of history. And the same goes for this book by Michael Hart, who is a Jewish American scholar. They apply the categories, some categories of modern sociobiology to interpret or reinterpret the historical process. And this happens every time there is a scientific breakthrough in the social sciences. Yeah. Also, I wrote, many books are kind of worthless because the author is blinded or constrained or deluded by ideology, social pressure, bias, etc., etc. So one has to decipher the book and also to decipher the hidden assumptions sometimes of the author. The book has to be deciphered and interpreted, but also the categories that the author uses, consciously or unconsciously. Yeah. Mortimer J. Adler rightly notices that and remarks that one has to learn from our betters, but first, who are our betters? This is the importance of studying the past. And I made a remark about no, he makes the remark, but I agree, the arrogance of the person who believes that he or she is better than the past just because he or she lives in a more advanced historical moment. To believe that spontaneously because there is chronological progression in the historical process, that to be born later means to be more intelligent, smarter, etc., etc. That's kind of deluding and arrogant in a way. And also a remark about the moralistic approach. In the modern world with progressivism, most people, they believe that they are morally superior to all preceding eras just because they are born in a progressive, because they have a linear view of the development of history. And this is the reason why a lot of people judge morally negatively someone like Aristotle, because Aristotle was in favor of slavery or the oppression of women, as they call this. But to misjudge Aristotle, to use the modern categories of leftist humanitarian ideology of the 21st century, to project this onto 4th century BCE Greek philosopher who is one of the greatest intellect of all time, it's completely, it's off the point in a way. Yeah. Yeah. There's a distinction between reading good books and reading well. And the purpose of this book is to read well, but someone who knows how to read well, to read intelligently, to read skillfully, he will, step by step and progressively, he will end up reading mostly good books. And then he draws a distinction between facts and insights. That's like previously facts and understanding. If you know how to read for understanding, then reading for facts will be easy. You will know where to find the data. There's a difference between reading good books, that would be the matter or the content, and reading well, that would be the form or the law in philosophical language. And this book teaches how to read well formally, the laws, actually the rules, that's another word, but the rules to follow in order to read well. So if you study this book thoroughly, maybe my lectures will shed a lot of light, and they will bring intelligence. Yeah. If you know how to read well, then you will be able to identify the proper content, the proper materials, the proper reading materials. So you will be able not only to read well, but to read good books and to read them well. And then I ask a question: is it better? So there's a distinction between, there's a difference between reading good books versus reading bad books, and then reading well versus reading badly. The ideal is to read good books well, but the question is it better to read a bad book well or to read a good book badly? If you know how to read, is it better to know how to read well and to read bad books, or not to be a good reader but to read good books? My view is that it's better to know how to read well. That the form, the law, is more important than the content. Because if here it's not a joke, but it's kind of comical. If you know how to read well, if you read bad books, you will know that these are bad books. And if you don't know how to read well, even if you read good books, you might not even notice that these are good books. Yeah, so it's more important to read well. That's why. But maybe if my lectures are successful eventually, people will notice that not only I help them to read better, but also to read better books. Yeah. And then he noticed reading for entertainment is the least demanding kind of reading because it requires the least amount of effort. But reading great books can be entertaining, although it's challenging and demanding, but it can be entertaining because it's satisfying to read intelligent materials and enlightening materials. Yeah. Then, reading as learning, the difference between learning by instruction and learning by discovery. And here I will make a short pause. Yeah, because I'm a little bit tired. Okay, 1 hour and 46 minutes. I just take a short pause. Yeah, I resume the lecture. He makes a distinction between memory and enlightenment. To remember means to be informed, to know that something is the case. To explain, however, means to be enlightened, which means to be able to say what it is all about and to be able to connect with other facts. So to remember, to be able to remember and to be able to explain, these are different. Intellectually, philosophically, it's different. To be able to explain, it's much better in a way because it means you can connect, you can develop intellectually, you can contextualize, you can, to be able to remember economic data, it's proof that you have a good memory, but to be able to explain the economic phenomena, it's much more enlightening and much more valuable. And about IQ differences, for instance, first there are the data, you have to know the data, but then to be able to explain the data, let me to theorize, to offer hypotheses about the causes and the consequences. And here I note, for the example of IQ, how the leftist scholars, how they reason. First, they say there are no IQ differences, either in terms of in the different ethnic group or between the gender. So first, they say there are no differences of IQ. Then they say, okay, maybe there are differences, but they are minor. That's the second one. The third moment is there are differences. Sometimes they are significant, but they are culturally determined. That's the third moment. And the fourth moment is, okay, there are differences, they are important, they are partly genetic, but we can change them nonetheless. So the left, actually, they are always kind of wrong, which forces the right to correct them constantly. Yeah. The same goes with socialism. The left, a century ago, they said basically, socialism will bring about more wealth than capitalism. After countless failures, they say, okay, maybe socialism doesn't bring more wealth, but it brings more well-being for first they say, that's what the classical orthodox Marxists said, socialism would bring more wealth than capitalism. It fails. They say, this was not real socialism, we have to try with different people. It has failed again, it has failed in the USSR, economically, in the USSR, Cuba, Cambodia, China, it has failed over and over again. So they are forced to say, okay, it's not because it's not real socialism, it's because maybe there are problems. But then they come up with another view. They say, the purpose is not to create more wealth, but it's not a problem of the wrong people in charge. We grant you that the problem, but we are still socialist nonetheless, because now it's not about creating more wealth, but about managing the ecological crisis. So they always come up with a new argument, and they always get defeated intellectually by the right. Yeah. Yeah. Memory is not knowledge, or very poor knowledge, whereas enlightenment is when you know what the author means and why he says what he says. So here, let's take an example. The number of deaths caused by socialism, they are listed on page 59 of this book. Or the amount of time that the average worker in America, but the same statistics can be found, and they are worse in other countries, has to work for the government. So first there is the statistic, but then you have to be able, if you are enlightened, you have to be able to give the reasons, the causes, the theory of why the data are the way they are. It's one thing to notice, first there are a lot of people who don't, but to notice why most socialist economic policies are a failure, or here I am surrounded by books which denounce the failings and the decline and the problems with the educational system in various Western countries. First you have to acknowledge the problem, but then you have to be able to give an explanation. Why does it fail? Is it contingent, or is it structurally a failure? Contingent versus necessary, these are logical categories. So to be intelligent and enlightened means to be able to give the reasons of why someone asserts what he says, or why you yourself assert what you say. Yeah. And I wrote as a note, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not talking about the Democrat of the US, I'm talking about the political Democrats for a lot of reasons that I have implicitly, unconsciously unconsciously expressed. Yeah. Because here just when you read just these kind of books, or these kind of books, let alone all the other, or these kind of books, it's very difficult to be a Democrat in a way. Not a Democrat, the left side of the American political party, but to believe in equality and the ability of all to participate in the political life and the political decision making of everyone equally. Yeah. Being informed is a prerequisite to being enlightened. You have to know at least some important facts in order to be able to explain them, to interpret them, and to build a theory. So empiricism is kind of useful. So it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. If you just have the information, but you are unable to explain and to logically connect, that's not enough. And yeah. Then about the argument of authority, an argument of authority consists in saying this person said so you quote a prestigious figure, therefore it has to be true. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. You have to be able to say, but why did this person of authority said this? Why did he say this? Usually in classical medieval Europe, for a few centuries, the figure of authority was Aristoteles, and just to say Aristoteles dixit, it means Aristotle said so, therefore it has to be true. That's mechanistic thinking, that's groupthink in a way. Sometimes it's good to back up what you say with the figures of authority. Yeah, and here another figure of authority. Yeah. So it's good to quote figures of authority, of course, but it's not enough, because you have to understand why they said what they said. And usually, if a person has been considered a figure of authority for many centuries, in many traditions, in many countries, usually there is a reason, which means that usually a lot of what a figure of authority says is worthy of being respected or taken into account or studied or meditated, usually most of the time. But you have to be able to basically to find out for yourself why they said what they said. Yeah. My views about democracy, I did not need Ron Paul to stumble upon them, but I'm glad to notice that Ron Paul, I'm not surprised, but yeah, that we agree on a lot. Yeah. Reading well versus reading a lot. There's a danger of misreading many books. Sometimes to read too widely, that would be extension. Sometimes to read too widely, if you do not read very deeply, very profoundly, it can be misleading. So to read many books, that would be an extended number of books, but with poor reading skills or very little time invested, that's counterproductive. The opposite would be to read very few books but to read them really well, yeah. The idea would be to read many books and to read them well on as many topics, as many different topics as possible. But it requires time, interest, skill, intelligence, etc. But yeah. Intelligence partly consists in being able to extract the particular and the universal from the singular. A lot of enlightenment can be shed on most Western countries by reading this book, and it's true for a book like this, and even more so for a book like this. Here, that's the singular case of the US in the second half of the 20th century, the 1980s, mostly because this is where a lot of the data come from, but that's a singular case. The particularity can be Western societies, meritocratic societies, democratic societies in the good sense of a meritocratic ideal, where people are free, at least legally and formally, to rise to the top through hard work and opportunity and intelligence. So that's a singular case, but it can be applied to all other particulars and eventually to all human societies, because in every human society, even the least meritocratic, there is a correlation between intelligence and status. So intelligence consists partly in being able to extract the P and the U out of the S. And another example that I thought about when I wrote these notes, the rise and fall of Rome, there are many parallels with the modern US, and I know that there are many books published in the US, but actually in many Western countries, but predominantly in the US, to make the parallels between the rise and fall and decline of the Roman Empire and the decline of the American Empire. It means here to extract the particular and the universal out of the two different distinct singular cases. And I wrote, there were in ancient Rome and classical America, there were farmers, militia, civic virtues, piety, restraint, which brought about success, prosperity, culture, luxury, and then eventually decadence and kind of degeneracy. It happened with the Republic and the Empire in ancient Rome and with the US. That's the curse of success. A very simplified view, but it's actually kind of true. The problem of Rome and the problem of the US, they are kind of the same. They were simply too successful, too good. They declined because of an excess of greatness, in a way. Yeah. Instruction versus discovery. Instruction is when a teacher teaches another. Discovery is when research, investigation, and reflection are done or are experienced, are tried without teacher. I wrote, in the modern world, with the advent of the internet, most teachers are not legitimate anymore because the internet makes knowledge obsolete very quickly, which means even someone with a degree, the knowledge that he has gathered through his degree, it can become very obsolete because of the very fast development of knowledge. And also because of political correctness and deception, a lot of people with a social status conferred onto them by society because of their supposed ability to share knowledge, they are becoming illegitimate. They are being challenged by the rise of information on the internet. And this is the psychological reason and the economic reason why many civil servants become socialist, because they want to secure their monopoly as agents of the state. They want to secure their job, and that's why the socialists, they promote all sorts of policies which increase the power of the state, because the more people are dependent on the state, the more they will conform to the political ideology. And a lot of people, they are socialists, even though they know that it's destructive for the whole of society, because they just want to lose their monopoly. And yeah, because if you are a teacher, you have a safe job, supposedly a public teacher for the rest of your life, and you do not have to make the effort of gathering knowledge, processing knowledge, which is being constantly produced on the internet. But there is a problem because the students, when they are not completely dumb, when they have not yet completely when they haven't been completely dumbed down, they can notice just at the end of a school of education, or even at the end of the day, or maybe during the pause, during the lunch, they can go on their phone and find knowledge in podcasts, video articles, which contradict in a convincing way the teaching that they receive in the morning or in the afternoon in their class. So the students, when they grow a little bit and they become intelligent, they can notice that the knowledge which is being taught to them in the educational system is either false or inefficient or manipulative. This is why the educational system will vanish everywhere eventually because of the very structure of the internet. Yeah. The libertarians, they are the only ones who have understood this, and before anyone else, because really, when you have access to the internet and you are intelligent and you can make independent research on your own, you notice that people are being constantly brainwashed, not necessarily consciously, but simply because the speed at which the information is being produced all over the world on all topics, it renders most teachers, no matter how well-intentioned and good, morally good they might be, it renders them obsolete because it goes way too fast in a way, and because everyone can see that the political correctness brainwashes students on a mass scale in all statist countries, namely all countries eventually, but it's more intense in the West. But yeah, someone who reads a book like this, he can know in real time that his or her children are being dumbed down when they go to school, and it's financed with public money. So at some moment, the people, they will become smart again. Yeah, and they will stop sending their kids to school, and they will maybe probably homeschool their children if they are intelligent and competent. Yeah. Okay. I'm offering free lectures. Yeah. I participate, I give my contribution to the abolition of the educational system everywhere eventually. Because at some moment, there are people who will notice that I can be very smart, and that they will know that I am a high school dropout, basically. And at some moment people will say it's not in spite of you being a high school dropout that you became smart, it's mostly because I'm a high school dropout that I became smart. Namely, at this moment, this era we live in, not going not only to college, but not completing high school, it's not a hindrance, it's an advantage, because you avoid a lot of the poison which is being shared. Yeah. So teaching agriculture and medicine, they share in common that these are the students, the plants and animals, and the patients which have to grow and improve and mature. Yeah. So teaching is like agriculture and medicine. Trying not to poison your patients or your vegetables or your students, that's the first step. The chemicals and the pesticides. Here I will go pick up another book. The pesticides and the poisonous the pollution is to agriculture what socialist education is to teaching. That's poison in the realm of agriculture, and that's poison in the realm of education. Yeah. Okay, so instruction consists in reading the written and or oral word. Discovery consists in reading the world. Yeah, experiencing the world. Yeah. Reading and the activity of the mind. Thinking means to use our minds to gain knowledge or understanding, like Odin, the Nordic god of knowledge. That's why it's important to think while reading and or listening and or doing research, which brings about attention to precisely the attention span of humans. Yeah, but it's important to think while reading, and since thinking tends to express itself in words, it's important to write or to underline important words, to reformulate, to express in your own words what you read. And here he says this later in the book, but if you are unable to reformulate what an author says with your own words, it's probably that you haven't understood. That's why using synonyms or different ways of expressing the same idea using completely different words, it's a good way of seeing if, checking if a student has learned or not. Yeah. So sensation, imagination, observation, memory, thinking, and constructing theoretically what cannot be observed. That's what physicists do to discover new planets or particles. They sit in their armchair, they study table of statistics, either in books a few centuries ago or on computer, and they discover, they deduce logically the existence of new particles or new planets. So here that's a joke for the Anglo-Saxon philosopher. Even the Anglo-Saxon who are prejudiced against the German way of the German method of armchair theorizing, those arrogant Germans who think that they can deduce the entirety of the world with their idealist philosophy while sitting in their chair. The Anglo-Saxons in the physics department, they do the same. They deduce by calculation and hypothesis the existence of planets or particles or yeah. Yeah, also he remarked that it's important to use imagination to read poetry, and here I make a remark. That's why, for instance, in old video games of the 1990s, they had poor graphics, a poor quality visually, but paradoxically, especially for instance the RPGs, the role-playing games, like the early Final Fantasies or the Pokemon games, the earlier, but they nonetheless used to be magical for those who enjoy this game because they require imagination. The graphics were really poor, so people had to imagine what was not very well depicted aesthetically because of technological limitation. That's why they had to use their imagination. That's what an illustration of what the author means when he says that one has to use imagination when reading poetry. And that's also one of the reasons why sometimes it's more interesting to read a book, a novel, than to watch the movie adaptation. Because when you read, you have depiction through means of word, but then you can imagine. And then when it is adapted a few years later in a movie, there is less room for imagination in a way. Hermione looks better in the movies than she could ever look in the books. That's good. Present and absent teachers, about books, teachers and educations. Listening to lectures is like reading a book. That's why sometimes it's important to take notes. I've been doing this with Hans Hermann Hoppe, Per Weiland, and others, a few others, Psych2Go sometimes. These are not lectures, but sometimes I take notes while watching video for the sake of enlightenment. If you ask a question to a teacher, if you ask a teacher a question, he can answer. If you ask a book a question, you have to answer it yourself. The book answers to the extent that you do the work of thinking and analysis yourself. Yeah. Also, I wrote about fake news. I already said this, but I repeat. Fake news is kind of an irrelevant notion because the media, they lie and deceive for structural, inherent reason. It's not because this or that fact was not correct that it's a fake news or not a fake news. Even if all the facts were correct, it would nonetheless be a structural deception because of abstraction. They only talk about parts of reality, not the whole, because there is partly political corruption or financial corruption among the journalists, but also because of groupthink. Here, I will go pick up my book about groupthink. Because humans, when they enter society, there is a game around the notion of status, and they every human has to play a game and to obey the rules of the social group to which he belongs to, and there are things which are not forbidden legally to talk about, but they are morally reprehensible because it doesn't fit the standard of the group. And Kevin MacDonald talks about this in this book, that's a group evolutionary strategy. The individuals, they have to subordinate their independent thinking to the collective discipline of the group for the sake of cohesion, but it can bring about collective deception. This is what this book talks about as well. And then he says, for those of us who are not in school, our continuing education depends mainly on books alone. That's why we have to know how to make books teach us well. Yeah. So that's the second chapter about the different levels of reading distinguished by Mortimer J. Adler. The goals of reading can be either entertainment, information, or understanding, and the goal that the reader sets when he starts reading a book determines the way he reads. The effectiveness of reading is determined partly by the amount and skill performed by the reader, the quantity of tasks that he can perform, and the quality with which, the intensity, the effort, the quality with which he performs each skill. Usually the more tasks you perform and the more intensity you put in your effort, the better. So reading is like learning from an absent teacher. So there are different kinds of reading who are qualitatively distinct, but there are also different levels of reading, and the logic, the concept of degree, of level, is that each layer, each level, each stage contains all the previous ones, one might say. So every stage, every level of reading that he mentioned contains within itself all the previous ones. They are not qualitatively distinct, they are quantitatively distinct, namely they are each is implied in the next one in a way. So there is elementary reading, inspectional reading, analytical reading, and syntopical reading. The first level basic reading or literacy or elementary reading. For instance, learning to read Greek or ancient Greek or the Cyrillic alphabet or Chinese or Japanese or Arabic, for most Westerners it's difficult, and it requires a qualitative shift in a way, because that's going from the Latin alphabet, in which the English, German, French, Italian, Spanish languages are written. Actually, the overwhelming majority of Indo-European languages, they are written in the Latin alphabet. But the Cyrillic alphabet, which applies to a lot of Slavic or Eastern European countries, or the Chinese, Japanese symbols, or the Arabic writing, if you do not have, you have to learn at the elementary level if you are a Westerner, and the reciprocal is true as well. That's elementary reading, namely the ability to decipher the signs and the symbols. Yeah. So the goal for elementary reading is to know how to recognize the individual words on the page. What does the sentence say? It's difficult to answer this question when we read a foreign language. What does the sentence say? This is the kind of question that is asked at the elementary level of reading. It applies either for young students, for pupils who enter I wanted to make a joke, those who enter the educational system, but those who quit the educational system. So often at the beginning, when you enter the educational system, you don't know how to read on the elementary level, but for a lot of people who leave the educational system, they don't know how to read at this level, even after many years of schooling. That's kind of a joke, but actually no. That's why here, a little bit more serious, that when the government statistics say the level of literacy has increased, if literacy means just the ability to decipher on an elementary level, it's really limiting and limited. Of course, it's better than not being able to decipher anything after having been schooled and instructed, but if it's just the ability to decipher without understanding anything, precisely, this is exactly what this book talks about, is that reading is not just about deciphering symbols, it's about making logical connections, categorizing, etc., etc. The second level, inspectional reading, I talked about this briefly earlier. It means to try to get the most out of a book in a limited amount of time. It can be 15 minutes or an hour. It's like speed dating, but for books. Yeah. And here I thought about interesting women. Freya, let us imagine that that's a Nordic goddess. That's a female shirt. I wrote about the comparison with speed dating. I think about some interesting, educated, intelligent women. You deserve an analytical reading. Because the purpose of speed dating, in terms of gender dynamics, one might say, is to check after a few minutes or a few dozen of minutes if the person is worthy of a romantic encounter and a more deeper relationship. So really, inspectional reading is to analytical reading, namely to thorough reading. What speed dating is to genuine dating. Speed dating, the purpose would be to see if the woman deserves a more thorough analytical reading. Yeah. There are very intense books on which you have to spend a lot of time on the book to get the best out of it, because it's really excellent. It's probably the same with women. I think about the European goddesses. I love you, dear women. Yeah. So, inspectional reading consists in skimming, not not skimming in the manipulative way. Skimming, S-K-I-M-M-I-N-G, not skimming, S-C-H-E-M. Skimming. Not scheming. Scheming. Yeah. So, inspectional reading consists in skimming systematically to know more about the author, the date at which it was published, the publisher, to skim through a book very briefly. Okay, it was published by the Mises Institute. It's written by Ron Paul. There's an introduction by Llewellyn Rockwell. It was published in 2012. The table of contents. Introduction, the 16 chapters. Forward with a quote, an introduction. Yeah, and 16 brief chapters. So here I can skim through the book in a few dozens of seconds. Actually, a more systematic inspectional reading. Here this book is really short, but for a book like this, you have the publisher's blurb, as you call this. Yet it requires a few dozens of minutes. When was it published? By who? What is the table of contents? How is the book divided? So here we have 3 parts. We have the preface, the introduction, part 1, the centrality of education, part 2, a strategy for educational reform, part 3, the ideal school. There are 3 chapters in the first part: educating for liberty, educating for leadership, educating for legacy. Part 4, family-based education, competition in education, self-instruction, online education, Part 3, what parents want, what students need, what colleges want, the Ron Paul curriculum, conclusion, plus some of my favorite websites. Yeah, so that's the table of content. Then, if you really wanted to read, to make an inspectional reading in a few dozens of minutes, you would study the cover, the back cover, briefly the information, the table of contents, you read the preface, you read the introduction, you read the conclusion, you read the index or the bibliography if there is one, and then you skim through the book, you read the leading sentence or the concluding sentence of each chapter, you spend broadly 45 minutes, 1 hour on the book, and then you can know whether or not you are interested in reading more thoroughly, and you can answer some questions. What is the book about as a whole? What is it about? What is the structure? So what is the book about is what is the content of the book? What is the structure? What is the form of the book? What are the parts? And what kind of book is it? Is it a novel, a treatise, a book about history? Is it a theoretical book? Is it a practical book? Is it fiction, etc., etc.? You have to be able to answer fundamental but very simple questions about the book. What is it about? What is the structure? What are the parts? What kind of book is it? In a short amount of time, if you perform an inspectional reading, you will gain a lot of knowledge about a book very briefly. So it is opposed to picking up a book on page 1 and starting to read from left to right, from beginning to end. It's counterproductive if you have no clue of what the book is about. Sometimes just looking at the map, the structure, the table of contents, and the key informations which can be gathered very quickly, it brings really a lot of value because you know what you get into, in a way. Yeah, like a woman, the speed dating, you can gather the important determinations. Yeah. Then the third level, analytical reading. This is a more complex, more systematic kind of reading. It makes heavy demands on the reader. So, first level, elementary reading to decipher the symbol. Second level, inspectional reading to get the most out of a book in a short amount of time. The third level, really complex, thorough, demanding, complete reading, very intense. That's analytical reading means thorough, complete, good, intensely active reading. Inspection, it's when you have a limited amount of time. Analytical, it's when you have an unlimited amount of time. If you say to a woman, you're like, you say, if you want to seduce a woman, you say, I'm used to reading a lot of intelligent books, and women for me they are like books. There are those who deserve a superficial inspectional reading. You don't want to invest a lot in this kind of woman, but you, my dear, you are a woman worthy of an analytical reading. You're the kind of woman I want to spend an unlimited amount of time with, to explore all the aspects, to learn. To exert my faculties upon you for my own betterment, for mutual enrichment. You have a beautiful cover, but you are also, I'm sure you are very deep and very profound. There is more to you than just a beautiful cover. You are filled with pages, filled with great ideas and mind-blowing perspectives, etc. You can you can invent all sorts of in case of a boring marriage, it would be, but you only discover this afterward, it would be about a wife. Yeah, I have to find. That's not the case of this book, but let's find a book with a great cover. Do I have books? Because this book is great and it has a great cover. Well, I could have picked a better choice, but usually I do not choose my books depending on if they look good. But yeah, let us imagine after a boring marriage, you say to someone about your wife, or you say directly to your wife, well, you looked good on the cover, but like most of my book, I picked you up, I put you in my library in a bookshelf, and I let you take the dust on the bookshelf. Yeah, that's what boring marriage, that's how they end up. Yeah, like boring books. But if you have a good sense of judgment, you will not pick up a boring wife to let them stand still on the bookshelf and become dusty. You will make an inspectional reading, and yeah. So in an analytical reading, you have to ask many organized questions until the book becomes your own. Yeah. If the goal is information or entertainment, analytical reading is not necessary. So analytical reading is the kind of reading which is required for books whose purpose in reading them is to acquire enlightenment. Not just information or entertainment, but really if you want to be enlightened by a book, and if you think it is worthy of your time, effort, and attention, then it requires an analytical reading. And finally, the fourth level, this is syntopical reading. That's the most complex and most systematic kind of reading. It's comparative reading. That's also the most rewarding. It consists in reading many books in relation to one another, which revolve around the same topic. And to simplify, analytical reading is what ought to be expected from high school students. Once they leave high school, they ought to be able to analytically read accessible but nonetheless demanding books. And syntopical reading, namely to read many books which revolve around the same topic to produce how do you call it, a memoir, a dissertation paper, I don't know how you call this. That's what is required, what ought to be required from college level students, because if you are capable of syntopical reading, which includes within itself analytical reading, then you are potentially capable of starting independent research on all topics, not necessarily be able to analytically read the most complex books which deal with topics that you are not trained to study. So for instance, if you receive a training in philosophy, to be an expert in theoretical physics or molecular biology, even if you are talented, it's not your field of expertise. But you ought to be able to understand, I would say not books for the lay audience, but demanding books on all topics, but really the most complex, the most complex book written by specialists for specialists in all the very complex fields of biology, physics, but also economics, etc. You are not supposed to be able to read these kind of books if it is not your field of expertise. But a competent college reader, if he's intelligent and competent, and he ought to be able to perform independent investigation on all topics by identifying the good books, the intelligent, accessible books for non-experts, and to become enlightened. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, it's almost been 3 hours. Maybe this series of lecture will be kind of very long because it takes a lot of time, and I do not intend to publish the first part until all of them have been recorded, so maybe it might take a while before I publish this video. But I intend to do this seriously because I have invested a lot of time, a lot of effort in preparing these documents. Here I speak fluently, one might say, as if I spoke normally giving a lecture. It's more genuine, it's more authentic, yeah. But the structure that I comment, I have spent a very great amount of time working on this. Yeah. I will go drink a glass of water. And here, that's my pause. I will go make a. I will drink a glass of water. Yeah. As I'm recording this, I have the intention of producing a few structured videos like this one, although I'm kind of being spontaneous when I talk, but the structure, I follow a rigorous structure that I have worked on. Yeah, and I have still a few videos like this to produce. Long videos, but then, depending on the circumstances, I intend to talk more simply, make shorter videos. I work for free. And for freedom. Okay. The first level of reading, elementary reading, so here that's a more thorough investigation. About elementary reading. A brief remark about the US education system from Mortimer Adler. The effort of the United States of America to educate its citizen is the cornerstone of the democratic way of life. That's what he wrote in the 1940s, I guess. And Murray Rothbard, that's an excellent book as well, very short, about the educational system. It's kind of very critical, but yeah. And he noticed that near universal literacy was attained in the US before anywhere else, which enabled the rise of a highly developed industrial society. However, he notices that there are differences of potential for children, which brings about difficulties to teach some children. And here the book by Charles Murray. Yeah. For egalitarianism is a destructive ideology because it presupposes wrongly that all children have the same potential, whereas it's not the case. Ability varies. Half of the children are below average in learning ability, in ability to learn reading skills and math. Too many people are going to college. Yeah. And America's future depends on how we educate the academically gifted. That's the view of Charles Murray. But Mortimer Adler was kind of an agreement. I think that's just common sense. It's just that the egalitarianism of the 1960s has kind of degenerated. Yeah. About the different methods of teaching how to read, well, there are various methods. ABC method, phonic method, analytical method. Here that's really for specialists. Stages of learning how to read. There are four, he distinguishes four stages in reading ability. What he calls, so here it's really for elementary basic reading. I briefly talk about this chapter, but that's not the most interesting, except for potentially the. But here it requires really to study special books. The links can be found in the book promoted by Ron Paul. Okay, my immediate environment is becoming a little bit messy because there are books all over the place. Yeah. There are links found at the end of this book for those who really want to homeschool their kids. So reading readiness means to have a good vision and a good hearing, attention, and the ability to work with other children. So here that's really, it begins towards 4 or 5 or 6 years old. The second stage in reading ability within the elementary level of reading consists in mastering 300 to 400 words after a year. Then the third stage is vocabulary building to increase the quantity of words. And the fourth stage in elementary reading consists in being able to assimilate his reading experience, the reading experience of the pupil or the student. Then about language and meaning, I wrote, a man inhabits his language in a way because the relation to the world is partly determined by the words which express categories which are being used by the subject. Therefore, to expand and extend one's own vocabulary and to refine one's own language enables to broaden one's own perspective on the world. The word race, when it's scientifically and anthropologically backed up, when we start referring to Asians as Mongoloids and whiteys, white people as Caucasoids, etc., etc., it changes the perspective. You change the word, but actually you change an entire perspective, because if you say to a Northeast Asian person, you are a Mongoloid, that's not derogatory at all, it's simply the terminology of serious anthropology. If you talk, while talking about white people or Europeans, if you define them as Caucasoid or Negroid for African people, it's not derogatory, that's simply the scientific classification. It completely changes your worldview. Because by changing the word, you immediately, unconsciously, when you know that these are anthropological categories, your perspective of the world changes radically because you start to interpret through the lens of race. And here examples in the modern world: diversity, cultural enrichment, refugee. These are words used predominantly by the left in a positive sense, and when it is used by the radical right, it is in an ironic, derogatory way. And otherwise they use words like ethnocide for population replacement, or they talk about invaders. And when the vocabulary changes, it's a reflection of a change of mindset, and that's why the words can as Eminem says, words can be great, or they can degrade, or even worse, they can teach hate. Yeah. Or fragile people, or the underprivileged. This is a word which is used to describe a certain reality. Disabled people, or the underclass, or depending on the mood, the political mood, it can be they can be accused of being parasites, or even worse, depending on the mood. But precisely, political correctness is an attempt to erase political tensions by manipulating language. It comes from a good intention, but it creates frustration because people are not morally allowed to name reality, and therefore they are frustrated, which brings about excesses. The excessive Germans of the 20th century, when they used the word or the expression Untermensch, of course it opens the door for a lot of abuse. That's why there is such an attempt to control language, because it can be a shift in language use is a reflection of a change in mood and psyche, and yeah. But the purpose, it's good to control language, but not to control morally, or even less legally or politically, but to control intellectually, namely to use the proper words to describe the world properly. And yeah, I wrote women's liberation. That's an expression which often means state empowerment. Sexual liberation, often it means promiscuity or degeneracy or even perversion. Neoliberalism, ultraliberalism, fascism, communism, these are words which are used meaninglessly, mindlessly. Another example, there are a lot of people in the US who use the word Europe to mean social democracy, and the US, for them, that's free market capitalism. But I understand how the people who use these words with this meaning, how they reason, because for them, Europe and the US, they are opposed in the realm of economics in terms of socio-economic model, but that's very limiting. That's why it's important to define rigorously what you mean when you talk about Europe or US or any country or any word, but it's simply important to rigorously define, because yeah, it's completely it's completely insufficient and off the point to reduce Europe as social democracy, and even more to reduce the US as free market capitalism. So it's important when people talk to try to define and to determine what do you mean when you use important words. In what meaning do you use them? What do you mean? This book gives a proper definition. It doesn't mean that the definition that it gives is correct, but at least the author rigorously defines the meaning in which he uses the word socialism. That's probably collective means of collectivization of the means of production. That was the first meaning, and then an attempt to realize economic equality through taxation and legislation and regulations. Yeah. So it's important to define, because there are a lot of misunderstandings founded upon a misdefinition of words. In step 2, when the learning child or person deciphers words, the symbols on the printed page or on the table board, which were meaningless, they acquire meaning. Meaning here means thoughts, ideas, representation, images, logical connections which go beyond the visual sign. A sign, whether it's a spoken word or a written word or a symbol, it's an objective physical reality, but the meaning is subjective in a sense that it is the mind which perceives through the senses the symbol or the sign through hearing or seeing, which interprets, which means make logical connections, representations, associate images, etc. And the author says, the discovery of meaning in symbols may be the most astounding intellectual feat that any human being ever performs. In step 3, namely vocabulary building within elementary reading, increasing the quantity of words changes the quality of expression as well. So here that's a logical determination. You can increase or decrease, well, usually increase let us assume that each step represents a certain amount of words mastered by whoever speaks. I don't know, let's say, kind of randomly. If you master 2,000 words, if you go from 2,000 to 2,100, that's kind of indifferent. If you go from 2,100 to 2,300, that's kind of indifferent. So that's just a quantitative change. But if you keep adding more words quantitatively, you will keep increasing the quantity of words that you master, and there comes a point, let us say here it's 5,000. If you go from 2,000 to 2,100 words, if you learn the 100 new words in a few months, let us say, it's kind of indifferent. It will not fundamentally change your expressing ability. But if you keep increasing step by step, unconsciously, little by little, more and more words, there comes a moment where the indifferent quantitative change will bring about qualitative change, and the difference between someone who regularly uses 2,000 different words and someone who uses 5,000, or between a child who uses 300 words and an adult who uses, let's say, 1,500 words, there's a difference in quality, not necessarily good, although it is in this case, but in ability to master a broader range of topics, to speak more fluently, to speak more distinctly, to express ideas more clearly. So the indifferent quantitative change in the numbers of words mastered bring about qualitative change. A person who speaks well or fluently, usually that is someone who masters a greater range of words. Now, the quantity of words that one masters or understands partly determines the quality of the conversation, the complexity of the worldview. That's why reducing men's vocabulary, limiting the vocabulary of men by dumbing them down. It restrains them, it imprisons them within their own mind. If you do not know many words, you are unable to expand your intellectual horizon. That's why it's important to learn new words in your native language or in foreign language, and to learn the specific technical vocabulary of many fields of investigation, because it enables to broaden your perspective, and behind every word there are categories, logical categories. Yeah. In step 3 also, the child or the person who learns, because elementary reading, either it's a child learning how to read, or it can be an adult learning how to read a foreign language. So in the third step, in the third stage, vocabulary building, you have to try to decode the meaning of words which are unknown. When you read a foreign language that you do not master fully, when you stumble upon an unknown word, you have to try to guess the meaning by looking at the overall meaning of the sentence and the context in which it occurs, and it can help. You have to try to deduce or to infer, to make an inference, that's a logical connection about the meaning of a given word or a few words that you do not understand, by deducing them from the context in which they appear. And then you learn how to read for different purposes, self-help, skills, acquiring skills, improving in school, studying, entertainment, etc., in different areas: science, social studies, language, arts, etc., etc. And I wrote, usually people who master several languages, they are more spiritual than most others, because the spirit of a people is partly being made present in its language, and the worldview of a people is partly structured by its grammar, in a way, partly. The analytical philosopher of the early 20th century, Russell, Whitehead, Russell, and then Wittgenstein. Whitehead was not an analytical philosopher, but they wrote a book together about the foundation of mathematics. But Bertrand Russell and Rudolf Carnap and the Circle of Vienna, and then Ludwig Wittgenstein, and the analytical tradition predominant in the Anglo-Saxon world, precisely they reduce a lot of assertion about metaphysics to a misuse of language or a delusion about language, but that's their limited view. Yeah. And in step 4, to assimilate your reading experience, you have to be able to carry on concepts, which actually means terminology, ideas in the ordinary sense, Denkbestimmungen, thought determination, from one piece of writing to another. You have to be able to interpret economics through the lens of sociology and vice versa, and to understand why a book like this is ignored or controversial through books like these. And you have to be able to read each topic and each book about each topic through the lens of all your other readings in order to develop a full worldview. And he notes that putting a lot of emphasis on the most basic level of reading, elementary reading, is a risk of neglecting the other levels, namely analytical reading. Yeah. Here about higher levels of reading and higher education. about the high school population, an ever-growing high school population, which has been the case in the US and in the Western world after the Second World War, in the 1950s and 60s. It's not necessarily a good sign because it means that there's a greater likelihood that the standards might decline. And I wrote, if 89% of a high school generation gets a diploma, getting out of high school, this is the case more or less in a country like France, or broadly, but if the mean IQ of the population is still 100 or slightly lower, it's not a good sign, because if, here I take the singular case of France, I think up until the 1950s or 60s maybe, 50% of the population used to get a high school diploma, and the IQ, I simplify, was broadly 100, so if half the population of a country with an IQ of broadly 100 gets a high school diploma, it kind of reflects a certain standards of requirement. But if it goes from 50% to 90%, it doesn't mean that the population has gone, I mean, the probability that the population has become super smart in a matter of a few decades is not very likely, but the probability that the standards have declined significantly is more plausible. Yeah. Whatever the Americans do, the backward Europeans of the continent, they do the same. When the Americans, when they become stupid, the Europeans of Europe, who say unconsciously, oh, we do whatever the Americans do, they become stupid as well. Here, that's the trick, because I've understood this. So if I want to make Germany great again, I have to make America great again. Yeah, it goes for college degrees as well. If more and more people get college degrees, it doesn't mean that more and more people are becoming smarter. It probably means that the quality of the average college population has declined and is declining. Yeah. I wrote, it just inflates their ego. I wrote also, technological development makes a lot of people useless economically, because a lot of jobs are being robotized, mechanized, digitalized, which means that the human capital, the skills of the people is becoming more and more obsolete, because they cannot compete with, I mean, some jobs cannot compete with the productivity of machines or computers. And there are a lot of people, that's the reason why a lot of people have bullshit jobs, and brainwashing the masses enables them to keep them satisfied, to dumb them down. That's tititainment. You offer bread and circuses, and the idiotic, not idiotic, but the masses which have been dumbed down will yeah, they are easier to control if they are being brainwashed and dumbed down. So yeah, from a Darwinian perspective, if there were no free education, which actually means compulsory state-financed education, the people who are really poor, they could not afford to send their kids to school. So on the longer term, if there is a correlation between the ability to get a diploma and to get social utility and status which enable higher reproductive success, if it were so, the people who were really incompetent as parents or unable to teach their children or to find the financial resources to send them to school, the birth rates of the least intelligent segments of the population might decline on a longer term, which would be good for the whole of society, because increasing the population among the groups which are the least intelligent, it's not good for the society, whatever the other determinations. But compulsory state-financed education with artificial degrees which are being distributed kind of for free without any sort of requirements in terms of intellectual work and effort, it inflates the ego of people, and the longer they stay in school, the more brainwashed they become. And from an economic standpoint, it has become really counterproductive, because the people who are cognitively limited, it's not their fault and it's not a moral flaw, but the people who are limited cognitively, instead of leaving school earlier and trying to get training skill for a productive manual labor, they are encouraged to remain longer and longer within the educational system, where the knowledge that they acquire is often very dubious, and they are not intellectually fit enough to sustain the requirements, even though the knowledge is being dumbed down. So it's just a way of artificially maintaining people within the educational system for longer, either to get them into debt or to brainwash them. And in the view of Mr. Adler, the purpose of analytical reading, the purpose of high school education is to produce competent analytical readers. The goal of college is to produce competent syntopical readers. I quote his view: a college degree ought to represent, or should represent, the ability to read any kind of book for general readers, and to be able to start independent research on any topic in any field. And I wrote, the democratic ideal, it sounds good, but actually, in reality, this is simply a fall to the lowest common denominator, because if you try to equalize everyone, knowing that people are unequal, or pretending that you don't know that they are unequal, if you try to equalize unequals, they can only be equal by downgrading the best, because it's easier to downgrade the best than to improve artificially the least talented in terms of intellectual faculties. They can have other abilities, but it's easier to downgrade the best than to upgrade the least, those with the lowest potential. That's why democracy, on the longer term, brings about a collective dumbing down and degradation of the overall intelligence of not only the most intelligent, but the poorest as well. About the democratic ideal, according to Mortimer Adler, and here I agree, unlimited education opportunity is the most valuable service a society can offer. The proof is America was very successful in terms of literacy, in spite of already the existing problems in the earlier than anyone else. It was already the case in the 1930s, before most other countries. I mean, the Nordic countries of Europe, like Sweden, probably they were even more advanced, but among the biggest developed countries, they were on top, one might say. And the bell curve has convincingly showed that the meritocratic ideal was achieved in the US in the 1980s, because if the distinction in terms of social status, class, and economic income were checked for IQ, most ethnic groups, and all ethnic groups listed in this book, they had broadly the same income. So if success in a democratic society, here in the neutral sense, society where opportunity is open for all, is determined by IQ, and it is significantly the case, at least in the US, where there are lower level of nepotism and corruption than in many other societies when it comes to the ability to rise, because there is a lot of corruption in the US, but in the ability to rise independently of status, if competence and hard work and intelligence are present, if this is a meritocracy, then the US is a very meritocratic society and was in the 1980s more than any other society, and in this sense it has been and still is very successful according to its own high standards of offering equality, not of outcome but of potential opportunity for people if they are intelligent and hardworking. And this book is a praise in a way for the success of America, but the Americans, they always complain because they have extremely high standards for themselves in a way. He wrote, "We must become a nation of competent readers." That was the goal. Okay. Okay, 3 hours and 16 minutes. I intend on completing the first part in a one setting. So, elementary, inspectional, analytical, syntopical reading, these are the 4 levels, and each contains the previous ones within itself. So there are 2 types of inspectional reading, that's the second level: systematic skimming or pre-reading, and superficial reading. And here we'll talk about systematic skimming or pre-reading, which is the first moment of the second level of the 4-stage process of reading. The question, when you have a limited amount of time to study a book, is it worth reading? Do you want to read the book? Does it deserve an analytical reading? I rewrote, it's like speed dating, but for books. Speed dating is the pre-reading of a woman, basically. Do not let yourself impressed by the size of the books of the woman. A woman with big books. She might seem very attractive, and maybe she is, but the size of the books, it's important, but it's not the most important. Here I will make a joke for the Americans. I have in my library, I have really big books, and here are two big books. They are really big in intellect and in weight and in size. Yeah. These are two of my biggest books. You can milk them dry. They are filled with nutritious intellectual content. This book I have started reading. I think it's really great. That's by Murray Rothbard, about the history of America. It's really, I guess, it's really an excellent book. Yeah. But do not judge a book by its cover. Yeah. Books, it's like attractive women. If the cover is good looking, that's great, but the purpose is to uncover the book, to get to the heart of the matter, to the substantial content. Yeah. So, about pre-reading, the purpose of pre-reading or systematic skimming is to discover the author's main contention, or to answer simply the question, what kind of book did he write? And you can look at the page title. I already said it, but I'll repeat for me. You can look at the page title and the preface in order to get a good idea of the subject, which enables you to categorize the subject, the book. What kind of book is it? Theoretical, practical, an essay, a treatise, a manifesto, a novel, etc. Or so, what kind of book is it, and what is it about? Is it about economics, biology, sociology, politics, etc.? Study the table of contents. That will be the structure. It's like reading a map before going on a trip. So you can read the table of contents, the chapters, the parts, the subdivisions, etc., etc. Check the index. That's a very useful piece of advice. So you can have access to the authors, that the author of the book that you are pre-reading has referred to, the works that he quotes or that he draws inspiration from. So usually in scholarly work, it's not really a scholarly book as such, but when you check the index or the bibliography, you can become familiar with really classical names, and you can, here that would be interesting, if you had to try to guess what kind of book is, just without knowing the title, the author, but just looking at the index, really for people with a broad culture, they could be able, just by recognizing the references being listed in the bibliography or the index at the end of the book, to guess what kind of book it is, very accurately in a way. Usually the same fundamental founding authors are to be found in the books which belong to the same school of thought, usually. In the case of books written by Austrian economists, Mises, Rothbard, Menger, Hayek, Hoppe sometimes, Ayn Rand, etc., etc. They are often quoted or listed in the index or the bibliography. Yeah. Read the publisher's blurb. The blurb is an example of a word that I had to decipher. I did not know the meaning. Apparently it means promotional piece. Read the introduction and the conclusion. look at the most important chapters and read a few paragraphs here and there. So the idea behind pre-reading is to spend broadly 1 hour on the book. Then you can place the book in a mental card catalog, categorize, and it requires, inspection reading requires focus and attention. It's a system to follow, a method to follow actually, like a detective looking for clues by inspecting the introduction, conclusion, table of contents, bibliography, index, cover, etc., preface, acknowledgements. You have to, like a detective, you have to be able to find what it is all about. What crime has been committed, has been perpetrated. The intellectual destruction of socialism. Who is responsible? Intelligent people. Yeah. As Margaret Thatcher famously said, the problem with socialism and socialists is they always run out of other people's money. Yeah. Then, the second moment in inspectional reading, that would be superficial reading. So once you have made your inspectional reading with the book, the speed dating for book, you can read superficially, namely from page 1 to the last page, without putting too much effort and without reading thoroughly, but just to read in one setting, not necessarily in one setting, but to read at normal speed, one might say, without seeking to understand everything on the first reading. He notices difficult books can bring disappointment, but read them through without stopping. That's superficial reading. Even if you don't understand, pay attention to what you can understand, not to what you can't understand. That's what happened when I discovered Hegel. No need, so for instance, in a superficial reading, no need to stop to read the footnotes or to waste too much time on difficult paragraphs in a first reading. A second reading will ease the task. It's like a second playthrough in a video game. Understanding 50% on a first reading is still better than 0%. And here a personal remark. Do not read commentaries. Read directly the great authors. Although I'm commenting this book, but it's not a written work. I do this freely while recording. But when it comes to classical authors, Plato, Aristotle, Spinoza, Kant, etc., the classics, especially it's true in philosophy because these are mostly philosophers which are being commented. Rather than the physicist or the mathematician or the political theorist, although it's sometimes the case. But try to read directly the author that you are interested in and not read the commentaries. Because you are not sure that the person who comments is competent. You are not sure that even if he's competent, you are not sure that he's reading his view of the author of the work that he comments is the most adapted for a beginner so read directly what the author that you're interested in said. So read directly Plato or Aristotle, etc., etc. And he writes, do not ruin Shakespeare by stopping at each difficulty or unknown word. If you try to understand everything at your first reading, if you stop at every difficulty, you will not get very far. About speed reading, you have to read at the proper rate, depending on the nature and complexity of the material. This is being acquired with experience, the ability to judge whether a book deserves or not a thorough reading, and how much time you ought to spend on a book you should be able, when you gather experience, you should be able to determine which book deserves what quantity of time in terms of investment. Yeah, so for instance, this book, it's a great book because it's accessible, it's intelligent, but if you want to thoroughly read a book about economics, you'd better read Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, which is more theoretical, but the purpose of this book is not to compete with Mises, it's simply to make some of the views of Mises more accessible. But yeah, it's a book which deserves an analytical reading, but not a thorough, very complex reading. Usually the more abstract, the more complex, the most theoretical book, there are those which deserve the greatest amount of investment. And the popular ones, those who are specifically written for a lay audience, they can be more, they can be read more superficially in a way, especially if you're intelligent. If you are not that intelligent, it's better to spend more time on simpler books, because trying to decipher really the complex ones, no. I mean, you can try, but yeah. About comprehension, to read actively means to read with concentration. That's not enough to be focused while reading, but that's the prerequisite. And to comprehend or to understand a book means more than just being able to answer simple questions. Yeah, you have to remain focused when you read. So a summary, the signs that a book sends you is like the road signs. It determines the way that you can spend on the book. You have to exert your judgment. But the purpose of inspectional reading is simply to view the form or the structure of the whole book and to gather a first view without going through the thorough process of analytical reading. Yeah. And the joke about speed dating, actually dating is really like selecting a book. Yeah. In order to profit from a book, you have to make an effort. Yeah. It's like reading for entertainment is to reading what picking up cherries on a tree is to agriculture. I mean, if you really want to profit from a tree or from a piece of land, you have to till the soil. You have to plant the seeds, to take care of the crops, etc., etc. If you are lucky enough to have a tree which gives directly fruits, like in the Garden of Eden, that's good, but you have to make an effort on the book, like a farmer has to work on the ground, on the soil, to produce fruits and vegetables. Yeah. Yeah. The essence of active reading, the 4 basic questions to ask when reading any type of book, any type of reading material. What is the book about as a whole? What is it about? The theme, the main point, or the subordinate theme? That's the first question. What is being said? What are the ideas, the assertions, the arguments which are presented by the author? Third, is it true or is it false? In whole or in parts? Is it completely true or partly true? Partly false, yeah. And what of it? What should you make of the ideas which are being expressed in the book? Is it significant? Why does the author believe it's important, etc., etc.? What is this book about? What does it say? Is it true or is it false? What to make of it? Yeah. What next? What follows? What is important or suggested, etc. These 4 questions, they are the basic rules of reading, the obligation of a reader, whether it's a book, an article, an advertisement. When you read any material for the purpose of information, what is it about? What is being said? Is it true or false? And then what? What of it? And the habit of asking this question is precisely the art of reading. You have to acquire the skill through effort. Yeah. So how to make a book your own? Asking questions when reading is better than not asking. It's better to be alert and focused than just passively receiving the content of the book, because if you are passive you will not receive anything. And the pencil is a sign of alertness as you read. You can underline, point the passages, the most important statements in the book. You can write notes, underline, circle, record question, make notes, etc. Here, each individual has his or her own habit, but simply when you read a book thoroughly, you have to write or to either in the book or in a piece of paper. Usually it's better to write on a piece of paper because, to outline the structure or to list the assertions of the author, the important ideas which are being exposed in the book. It's a proof, it's a mark of your intellectual ownership of the book. To think about an object means to make it your own. I've been thinking about you, America. Yeah. I've spent a lot of time thinking about really great women. I'll talk about this at some later. I was not satisfied with pre-reading. I was so excited and interesting by the content which was being offered, that I wanted to go more thoroughly and maybe at some moment people will be interested in reading me, not literally, but about reading and thought. Reading means thinking. This is another way of reformulating the idea that you have to exert an effort and to be active, to exert your skills intensely, many skills that are when you read, so you have to think. And thought tends to express itself in words. Language is the medium through which thought expresses itself. So you have to use the proper words to define, to clarify, to determine. And usually if you cannot express clearly what you have in mind or what you think that you understand, usually it means that you do not understand. If you cannot express in your own words and clearly reformulate with different words, you do not understand, usually. Reading is like a conversation between a reader and an author. To agree or to disagree with an author is a form of respect that you can pay to him. To disagree with an author, it's like paying homage, because you acknowledge that what he said was worth considering, studying, thinking about. So here, that for those who are familiar with the history of philosophy, Nietzsche, for instance, he criticizes Plato and Socrates sometimes vehemently, one might say, but secretly Nietzsche, he admired Plato and Socrates and Hegel. He criticizes Kant a lot, but actually he respects Kant. The Germans, metaphysicians, they respect one another, and even they admire one another, but they pretend to struggle. Sometimes they do, but to fight amongst one another. But actually, they respect one another and they admire one another. Yes, so the Austrian economist Henry Hazlitt, he disagrees thoroughly with Keynes, for instance, and there are many. Voltaire disagrees with Rousseau. There are many in the history of thought, many disagreements, famous disagreements. Aristotle disagrees with Plato, etc., etc. But usually, the great disagreement in the history of thought, whether in economics, politics, the sciences, philosophy, those who disagree, they really respect and they really pay homage to those that they contradict, because they know that even though they might disagree, they owe them a lot, and that their point of view would not be possible or would not exist without the predecessors that they are contradicting. That's kind of a Hegelian view, but it's intelligent actually. Yeah. Then about the three kinds of note making. Here I quote what he says, but it's not that I disagree, but it's not the most interesting aspect. The structure of the book would be the form, the substance of the book here would be the content, and structural note making are notes that the reader, you have to take in order to extract the structure of the book. What kind of book is it? What is it about? What is the structural order of the book, the table of contents, the skeleton, if you will, and the classification and the categorization of the book. This is structural note making. What he calls conceptual note making consists in taking notes about the truth and the significance of the book, the concepts, the assertions, the ideas, the arguments advanced by the author. And dialectical note making, it's useful in the case of syntopical reading. It consists in taking notes while reading a book, while having in mind the discussion or the debate that you as a reader organize in a way with other books. So what he calls dialectical note making consists when you read several books at once. It's not literally reading several books at once, but when you dedicate a certain amount of time over, it can be over many weeks, many months, many years of reading many books at the same time, because they all revolve around the same topic that you are interested in. What he calls dialectical note making consists in keeping in mind the shape of the discussion. So you take notes while reading one book in order to use these information that you collect to use them, to connect them with other informations, to make books talk to one another through time, space, language, sometimes culture, etc. So structural note making, conceptual and dialectical. The boring German metaphysician, he would probably say the structure of the concept is dialectical. So the structure of the concept and dialectics, they are kind of the same, but they are also different. That's the structure of dialectic, that's the dialectic of the concept, and that's the concept of the structure. Yeah. Then, about forming the habit of reading. I have been dialoguing, I've had a dialogue with Hegel over the years. Yeah. And with Nietzsche sometimes. Yeah. So forming the habit of reading, about skill in reading. The art or the skill, any art or any skill, consists in acquiring the habit of operating according to a set of rules. You can only form a habit by operating. One learns by doing, or practice makes perfect. There's a difference between knowing the rules abstractly and having the habit, possessing the habit of applying the rules. In order to apply the rules, you have to know the rules. Yeah. So art consists in rules to be followed in operation, and operation, it comes from the Latin word opus, operis, which means work. The magnum opus means the great work of an author. So to operate, it's in a way to work, to elaborate, to operate, labor and operate. It's the idea of working. Yeah. So the rules to be followed, the habit of operating according to rules. That's an art. An artist operates according to rules. Being an artist means operating according to rules, and the artist, the groundbreaking or the mind-blowing or the rule-breaking artist, those who make a breakthrough, in order to break the rules, the codes, the standards of a style or of an artistic activity, first you have to know the rules. You have to pay homage to the classics. And here the example that I have in mind, Eminem, he masters classical hip-hop in a way. In the song, in many songs he pay homage to his main influences, but he was able to break the rules in a way of hip-hop. And that's what every great artist does, because he mastered, or he heavily influenced, and he knew the rules of classical hip hop, and it's true of every great hip hop artist, but that's the one I have in mind. So every great performer of any kind of artistic endeavor, usually he can only bring a breakthrough or be really unique in a creative way, because he masters, or at least understands or inherits influence from predecessors. Yeah. A highly original painter or sculptor, people think that he isn't following rules, but it's because the rules aren't seen. And Kant defined a genius by someone who gives rules to art. Yeah. A genius is very intense and therefore very extended because he is very influential. So virtue has to be practiced and not just preached. You have to think your life and live your thoughts. Yeah. And finally, to conclude about the first part, reading is a complex art. You have to go from many rules of reading to one habit, the art of reading, and I intend to talk about the rules of reading in the next lectures, but I will conclude the lectures shortly thereafter. So reading is complex. It can be graceful and harmonious as opposed to awkward and clumsy. In an art there has to be wholeness and unity in multiplicity. And the example drawn by the author is learning how to ski. It feels humiliating at first. You feel like a fool because you have to learn a lot of new acts, standing on the snow with skis, skiing on the snow. It's kind of awkward and clumsy. you have to forget the separate acts when you learn a new art, but after having learned all of them, so that dissociation and then association, you have to coalesce a lot of different acts into one complex, harmonious whole. But first you have to become an expert at each of them. Each separate act requires your full attention. In order to learn a complex skill, one has to learn each act separately. A great husband, he has to be a friend to his wife, a great friend, a great lover, kind of a father figure. He has to be a romantic, he has to earn an income, he has to be entertaining, he has to perform the marital duties, he has to raise the kids, so he has to be a great father. All the separate acts together, otherwise the wife complains. Yeah. Learning how to read is complex. Complexity to simplicity means the many to the one. When each of the subordinate acts can be done more or less automatically, you have formed the habit of the whole performance. But it's difficult to think about mental acts, because thinking about one's own thought is unusual, and many people are not used to doing this. So yeah. Yeah. That was the end of part 1. So there are 4 parts. The 4th is really short. The second is the longest, I guess. It's about analytical reading. So maybe I intend to make maybe 3 or 4 parts, depending on the time that it requires, to make a complete lecture and presentation about how to read a book. Yeah. Yeah. And now I will rest a little bit, and then I will clean my room, because I have brought a disruption and a little bit of mess by working and disrupting the order of the books. But I intend to rest, as I will go out. And eventually I will rewatch the video to put the structure, to see if I do not say too many dumb stuff. Yeah. So that was the first part of my series of lectures on how to read a book, and I will end with a piece of advice. Whenever you, other than myself, watch this, if you have the opportunity, buy this book. Maybe it should be translated in other languages again. And if you are used to reading a lot, or if you are intelligent enough, you don't need to buy this book, because my lectures will provide a sufficient knowledge. Yeah. So if I can help, yeah. Make America smart again. Yeah. I will stop the video here.